Gregor. There's probably a few times you figured this wasn't going to happen. Looking back at everything from this point to then, what was the biggest challenge to get this to Coat?
Well, it's never that I thought it wouldn't happen. It was just a matter of when would it happen. Obviously it took a lot longer than I thought it would take. 8 years is a long time. But to finally, listen, Madison Square Garden has had our back the whole time. They've been big supporters, and I appreciate them a lot. And obviously to be in that historical building where not just all the great fights have been, but all the great performers that have performed there. I knew, not just for the fans and not just for the fans of New York, but also for Madison Square Garden, I wanted to deliver the biggest, baddest card in combat sports history.
What is planned for the build-up? Obviously a big week, and New York is going to be a great subplot to all of this as the fights go on. What do you expect?
Absolutely. I think New York's as big as much a story as the fight card itself, and all the different fighters are there. And, this Saturday is a historic event because when we look back on this card, obviously the fights now have to deliver, but it is the greatest card ever assembled in UFC history and possibly ever in combat sports history.
That was my next question, where it ranks. And you've seen every card, and you say UFC 205 before a punch or a kick is thrown, this is the best card you've seen. Even
if you're a fan on the fringe and you dive in on the big fights here and there, everybody knows what a ridiculous card this is. 3 title fights, and even in the prelims, as you get down into the prelims, Jeremy Stephens versus Frankie Edgar, Khabib versus Michael Johnson, and the list just keeps going on and on. This card is just ridiculously stacked with great fights.
Your opinion's worth a lot more than mine. For whatever it's worth, I think it's, and I've been watching since UFC 31, 32. It's the biggest card I've ever seen. So I'm very excited to see it.
Thank you, sir.
The #1 attraction on that card is Conor McGregor, and he had the mother of all build-ups at UFC 196 with Nate Diaz. And peel back a little bit, although it was pretty much there in 202. When you see his preparations and how he has built this fight, how do you see Conor changing from those 2 cards to this one?
Yeah, I mean, Conor is not only an incredible fighter. One of the things that I respect the most about Conor is usually guys that get to that level where they're making so much money and every time they fight so much is on the line, they become more cautious and they don't, they don't do things they would have done when they were younger coming up. Conor puts all the chips on the table every time he fights. Literally, when this guy steps out of the octagon, he's the only fighter in history who's asking me, I want to be on the New York card next, or
really?
I want to, oh yeah. I mean, I've never seen anything like it. People love to hate the guy, but you cannot deny that this kid is exciting to watch. Tell me the last boring Conor McGregor fight you saw. Nothing the guy does is boring. His press conferences are exciting. His weigh-ins are exciting, and his fights are even more exciting.
He has an incredible gift of gab, and he has you at his every word. And I think that's a big part about being the star power. When you look at creating these stars, which is the lifeblood of what you guys do, what do you look to do? You have a great group of guys for UFC 205. What do you look to do to unearth that next big guy?
Yeah, it's more than just talking, though. You have to back up everything that you say.
Yeah.
And that guy has done that. That's what makes him so entertaining and so exciting. He not only, he's probably the best ever in the history of the sport, or combat sports, as far as mental warfare goes. He's the best at it. He gets under people's skin. He gets in people's heads before, during, and after the fight. And then he goes in there and he's incredibly talented. As far as the rest of the stars, I mean, when you have a fight that's this big, all these guys have to do, I have the best of the best on this card. They just need to go out and do what they do and deliver. And believe me, Joanna Jędrzejczyk is one of the nastiest female fighters ever. She's the 115-pound champion. Tyron Woodley is taking on Wonder Boy Thompson, which will be a ridiculous fight. And like I said, the undercard could all be main events on other cards.
As a Cuban guy, I see my guy Yoel Romero like 4 or 5 deep. I got to check in early. I don't think you want to miss a blow of this card.
That's a great fight, and the winner of that fight is probably going to determine who gets the next title shot at 185 pounds. But
we got a lot of handsome bald fellow on the set right now. It's UFC 205. It's New York City. It's the Garden. It's Saturday night, man. I can't imagine the level of excitement. It's only Tuesday. How do you manage the not anxiousness, but the excitement between now and then?
Yeah, I got to New York on Sunday, and it really won't start hitting me till probably Thursday. Thursday's our press conference, and Friday are the weigh-ins, and then obviously when I walk into the Garden on Saturday night, it's gonna be special. It's gonna be one of those moments. There's very few of these moments. that I take in, but Saturday I'm gonna.
Good, and you should, right? I mean, I'm a big believer in that. You got to take a second just to stop and look around and take inventory, because if you don't, you miss all the good stuff.
I don't do it enough.
Well, do it Saturday.
Yeah.
Not that you need advice from me. Now, one of the things you're great at, and I mean great at this, and it's your job, is to sell and to promote. And when it comes to cards, I don't remember ever hearing like UFC 190 whatever, and you're like, nah,
Right.
never.
Right.
But what makes Saturday's card particularly stand out to you?
Well, first of all, if you look at the battle we've had over the last 8 years to get into New York, right, number one. And I believe that all that fighting and the build-up and everything made this even bigger, this moment even bigger. I built the biggest, baddest card, not only in UFC history, but probably in the history of combat sports. From top to bottom, this whole card, if I started halfway through the prelims, these guys could headline. Even the casual fan who just dips in for some of the big ones are blown away and know that this is the biggest card ever.
But you got Conor up there, and here's a guy that you speak of, a casual fan. He has done what's the most difficult thing in sports to do. I don't care what your sport is, but to cross over and become a name that the grandma knows. That it's like my guy Rosillo on radio would always say, if you become like a topic on The View or something, the morning shows, they know who you are, and he's done that. For you, you've had stars. What makes him unique?
What makes him special and different than anybody else? If you look at how famous Ronda Rousey is, Ronda Rousey acts. She's the first woman, to ever come in and win a title.
And be a true headliner.
Yeah, and exploded onto the scene. There's a lot of reasons why Ronda became big. What makes Conor so special is men are a dime a dozen. Men have been fighting since the beginning of time and everything else. This guy broke through. And one of the reasons is every time this guy fights, most people, when they get to the level that he's at, the making the money, the fame, and all the other things, they get a little skittish. They don't take the chances and the risks they took on their way coming up. This guy puts all the chips on the table every time he fights. And believe me, I've been around fighters since I was 19 years old. I've never seen anybody like Conor McGregor. And that's what makes him special. Plus, tell me the last time you saw a boring Conor McGregor fight.
Well,
they don't exist.
Or presser.
Or press conference. Or weigh-in.
But I imagine when you have to try to corral the energy and the passion and the fury that is Conor McGregor, I imagine your job, and it has been at times, it's a challenge, is it not?
And I don't try to corral the lunatic that is Conor McGregor. I let Conor McGregor be Conor McGregor. You don't mess with that. When you have something that's that great, you step back and you go, let him do what he does. This is who he is. This is what he does. Yeah, there's times when he gets a little bit over his skis and he gets a little crazy. And you know what? At the end of the day, he's not as difficult to deal with behind the scenes as people might think. And there's a lot of misconceptions about our relationship. I have a good relationship with Conor.
For Bones Jones, how optimistic are you that there can be another chapter in this book that ends the book appropriately?
I'm starting to not become optimistic about what's next for Jon Jones. I think Jon has a lot to prove to me, to the fans, and definitely to himself. He's proved everything in the octagon. I mean, this kid could have been one of the greatest ever. I mean, I believe that he's the greatest talent we've ever seen. But in being a great talent, it has to be great in the octagon and outside of the octagon, and he has failed miserably. I don't know if I have the confidence in him to headline an event with him again, because it costs millions of dollars. We put millions of dollars into the advertising and all the promotion, and I don't have the confidence in him to headline a card these days.
Well, I mean, and I think that we would both agree that the most important thing is to have his life in order, and then if he can get that together, then you can worry about what comes next in the octagon. But understanding the chapters that precede where we are, why you wouldn't be optimistic. I'm glad we're having this conversation face to face, just so I can own something. Okay. I've rarely been as wrong as I was about your sport, and initially when this first started, I paraphrasing myself, but I'm pretty sure I characterized it as meatheads and bad T-shirts, and then it got worse, and then it got worse from there. Seriously though, you all have built truly an empire, and I look at McGregor and Diaz this year, and you look at this has been an amazing year in sports. You put together like year-end lists. That'll be on the list for the most memorable things that happen in sports. And I think there were a lot of people that doubted, but I don't see those people anymore saying what you're not. I think people are just recognizing and acknowledging what you guys are. Do you feel that way?
No, it's true, and thank you for saying that. You know, when we grew up, you know, you and I, they were the traditional ball and stick sports. And as we started, when we bought the UFC back in 2001, and we started to meet with a lot of the media guys, they were way older than us. The guys who were running the newsrooms, they didn't want to hear about this.
Oh, barbaric, this, that, and the other.
But the younger generation was into it. Now, if you look over the last 16 years, if you think about people, you know, that were anywhere from 8 years old to 19, they grew up with the UFC. So the UFC, and again, you and I grew up, your parents would put you in karate or taekwondo. This is the martial art that men, women, and children are taking all over the world. So it's fascinating how fast it has changed and how many, but you know, I don't blame you for being a naysayer. I was a naysayer at one time too, until I got educated about the sport.
Well, I mean, last laps or whatever, you guys are going to be in New York City on Saturday night. I know a lot of people fought metaphorically to get this to happen. I know how excited you guys are. I appreciate your kindness with your time, and enjoy Saturday. I know you will.
Thanks for having me.
That's our pleasure. All the best.
Appreciate it.
Dana White, UFC 205, New York City. Buy it. Lots of money is going to be made. Piles of money.
This thing's going to sell tickets and sell pay-per-view anyway. I said after the John Jones Cormier thing that can never happen again, and then it happens again at the MGM. It's not good. It's not good for the sport. It's not good in dealing with our partners here in Las Vegas. A lot of people respect the UFC, respect the athletes, and it's never a good thing when something like that happens. So the thing's going to sell based on the fight. The fight's going to be a great fight. And I don't think anybody has any. If you're a fan of fighting and you like to watch great fights, this is the fight to watch on Saturday. That stuff doesn't need to happen to sell fights.
How annoyed were you at Conor